I'd like to encourage everybody to be turning to the 9th chapter of the book of Daniel. The 9th chapter of the book of Daniel. Over the last several weeks, we've been talking about the visions that Daniel saw. We talked about the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, that Daniel had went to God and asked God to explain that vision as well as tell him what the vision was. Well, we know that he also had the vision, which was the same vision, in essence, the same topic, if you will, to share with Belshazzar as well as Darius. Tonight, we want to talk about the vision of 70 weeks that's found in chapter 9. Now, this chapter and this topic is probably one of the most disagreed upon chapters that we find in the scriptures. I would consider that several would look at this and have different understandings of it, when in reality it's not really that hard when you take it within the context of the book of Daniel. What are we talking about? What's going on? And how can we make application about it? Now, for those that have this theology or this ideology, it's not really a theology, but that have the ideology that sometime in the future that Jesus is going to return and that he is going to establish a physical kingdom, utilize this as one of their primary passages to prove their thinking. The problem is that Jesus never said that he was going to come back into this world and establish and reign over a literal kingdom. Jesus taught a number of things regarding his kingdom, which must be recognized as his truth. The belief of something in the future that is physical is not noted within the context of Daniel chapter 9 or any place else in the Bible. Jesus taught in Matthew 16 in verse 28, "Truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Now, this is Jesus' kingdom. This is the one that he established. This is the one that the individuals that he was speaking to at that time were going to see fulfilled. And they did. If they did not see the kingdom come into power, the spiritual kingdom that Jesus established, that he's sitting at the right hand of God ruling over, then we've got people running around here that's way over 2,000 years old. And I haven't seen any of those of recent. Now, I've seen some old people. Man, they're getting younger every day. Have y'all noticed that? Old people getting younger? Or maybe it's I'm getting to be old people. That's the story. Jesus says these people will see his kingdom established. And you can go back to our other videos and see this same thing talked about. If Jesus did not tell the truth, if Jesus was mistaken about the coming of the kingdom, then Jesus, in essence, has lost his deity. Because God don't change things to suit humanity, to suit human beings. And if that had been the case, then Jesus would not be deity. We could not build our faith on him. He would not be the only begotten Son of God. He would not be a part of the divine Godhead. But yet, the Hebrew writer tells us in Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 8 that Jesus is God. And in Titus chapter 1 and verse 15, it notes that he is in his nature that he cannot lie. So we need to kind of take off the table some man-made ideology about something that's going to happen in the future and see what is in context in Daniel and what is going to happen. And the only way that we can get the elements of these 70 weeks is to fit a model that is from the scriptures, not from the mind of individuals. Jesus, now reality, is going to absolutely return to earth. But he's not going to set up a kingdom. In John chapter 6 and verse 15, they wanted to make him king. And what did he do? It says, so Jesus perceived that they were intending to come, take him by force to make him king. Withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. He wasn't going to be king. That wasn't what was in the plan. The plan was a spiritual kingdom during the time of the Romans to be established. And that's what Jesus did. But yes, he's coming back. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10 it says, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. When Jesus comes back, the earth will be gone. This idea that there's going to be a second chance, the idea that Jesus is going to come, there's going to be a tribulation, there's going to be all this time, and then there's going to be the judgment, is not taught in Daniel chapter 9, nor anywhere else in God's Word. The next time that Jesus shows up here, it will be the end of the existence of what we know of as the earth. In Acts 24, verse 14, it says, but this I admit to you, and according to the way which they call the sect, I do not serve the God of our fathers. I do serve the God of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets, having a hope which these men cherish themselves, that there shall certainly be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. Talking about a singular reality, the resurrection of the righteous and the wicked. But this world, like we know today, when Jesus comes back, is going to be burned up. It's going to be destroyed with intense heat. So, Jesus established that kingdom. God did not change his mind because the Jews rejected him. And I think as we go into Daniel chapter 9 here, starting down about verse 20, we see that God had a plan, and God had a thought that, yes, the Jews were going to reject him. Not all, but some. It says, beginning in verse 20 of Daniel chapter 9, now I was speaking and praying, and confessing my sins and the sins of my people Israel, presenting my supplications before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God. Now, we've read other places that Daniel was a prayerful individual. And he prayed 3 times every day toward Jerusalem. And we know that this is one of the things that the Chaldeans used against Daniel with Darius. And that's why Darius cast him into the lion's den. But it notes here that he was speaking, that he was confessing his own sins, but also the sins of the people. He was bringing to light the situation, the problems. He was supplicating before the Lord on behalf of the holy mountain of God. He had a great concern for Jerusalem. And he was very adamant about noting this reality. Now, we understand that as he is praying, verse 21, he has a visitor. It says, while I was still speaking in prayer, then the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. So Daniel identifies whom he is going to be speaking with. Now remember the first 2 visions, he was asleep. The third one, he was awake. Now we find Gabriel, as it notes here in verse 21, coming to him. Now, in verse 21, it says, then the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously. So we can understand that this is the same one that he had seen before. Now we need to understand that Gabriel is an angelic being. And we talked about that in our last lesson. So he understands who this is. He understands the connection that is with him and with Daniel. Now, Gabriel, even in the angelic, looked like a person. And where we have this translated, then the man Gabriel should or could be translated, then the person Gabriel. So he had that human attribute, if you will. And you can go back and you can look about Gabriel's work. He was the one that went to Zacharias when John the Baptist was to be born. We also know that he went to Mary and told her about the birth of Jesus over in Luke chapter 1. So Gabriel kind of had a special deal here. He was bringing some important information to Daniel. Now, in some of your versions, it notes here that, or it would read that Gabriel would have come in swiftness or on, let me look back here, flying swiftly. Well, the wording denoting this here in this context really brings it back to Daniel. He had been praying. He was concerned about Jerusalem. He was concerned about what was going on. And he was extremely weary, would be a better translation. And again, this would have been about the time of the evening offering. He continues in verse 22. He says, he gave instruction and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you insight and understanding. So here Gabriel is going to give him this understanding, the insight into what's going on. Now, as we look at this, he's going to tell him what's going to happen here in the future. We're not going to go back and look at the 7 great empires. We're going to talk about something else. We're talking about Israel here. We're talking about the children of Israel and the concern that Daniel had about Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem had been destroyed. They had taken Daniel many years, maybe even 80 years before, from Jerusalem, probably closer into the 60 years mark. But here we find in verse 23, at the beginning of your supplication, I commanded, at the beginning of your supplications, the command was issued, and I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. So give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision. Now, he's going to give him insight, going to give him understanding, and this, of course, come about because of his supplication, his concern for what was going on. But I want you to look here. Daniel was a man that was highly esteemed by God. Now that would be a blessing to know that we were highly esteemed by God. So as we continue in this, we're going to gain an understanding of this vision. Now, remember that at the end of this, he says you're going to have to keep this quiet. You can't just go out and tell everybody this, but Daniel is getting some insight of what's going to happen with Jerusalem in the future and the children of Israel. Now, if we look down into verse 24 and 25, it begins talking about these 70 weeks. Now, in verse 24, it says, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgressions, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, the 70 weeks is what gets people confused because they don't understand the application of Hebraic numerology, and it comes into play here within the word, within the number 70. Also, the translation of the word weeks, and that's what gets people confused, but it's also utilized to be added to make it something way down in the future. See, a lot of these individuals, they believe that this is talking about not a current thing, but a thing that's way down in the future. Does that make sense? This is going to be fulfilled behind us, but they're wanting it way out here, and that's what they try to apply it to. So the first thing that we need to determine is what it means by the number 70. Well, this word, or this number, is used figuratively. And the word weeks, I can see that here real quick. Right here's weeks, is translated like unto other passages that utilize this word. But this word weeks means 70s. So 70s is the way that we should read it. So the long answer will bring us, I hope, to an understanding of this. What's going to happen? What's going on? What is he talking about? Well, we know from the prophecy itself that the rebuilding of the temple was what he's going to be talking about, if we look at the entire section here. So the temple's going to be rebuilt, and something's going to happen in the future. Now we're talking about Daniel's future, the people's future. This entire prophecy is said to occur in 70 weeks, which is from the first commandment to its fulfillment. Now, the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem came from Cyrus. In Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1, it says, "Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judea. Whoever there is among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judea, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem." Now, there's a whole lot in that. But tonight I just want us to see that Cyrus, the king of Persia, made the decree to rebuild the temple, to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, this happened sometime around 539 to 538 BC. And I'm going to go ahead and say 538 for tonight's thinking. So, after Cyrus took Babylon, he was in power, and in essence, he made the command to reinstate, rebuild Jerusalem. And that gets us back to Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. The end of the 70 weeks prophecy culminates with the ending of sacrifice and destruction, and the destruction of the city and the sanctuary. So there's going to be some serious things happen at the end of this. Not only the rebuilding of Jerusalem, but the end of the temple, the end of Jerusalem. Now, if we look back in history, this happened in AD 70 when Titus and the Roman army came and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. Everything will be fulfilled. All the work of the children of Israel that God started at Mount Sinai until that point will be concluded. And this is around 608 years that this will take place, not 70 weeks. So that brings us back to the knowledge that 70 weeks is figurative language. It's apocalyptic language, if you will. Now, down in verse 26, we're going to talk about the 69 and the 70 weeks and the end of it. And this brings us to about 30 AD. Some will put it around 33 AD. And that's when Jesus died on the cross. So the time span between the decree of Cyrus and the cutting off of the Messiah was around 568 years in round numbers. And that's what he's talking about. This is what's going to happen from that time when Cyrus made his decree to rebuild Jerusalem until Jesus establishes his kingdom. So what then did the 70 weeks mean? Well, again, the word for weeks is Shabua. That's the word right here for weeks. And it means sevens or 70ths. In the context of Daniel 24, it clearly looks like a period of time that follows on the heel of the Babylonian captivity that lasted 70 years. And a lot of times the translators will go back and they will use the word weeks, but many people in their minds will use the word years. So let's look briefly at this number 7 or 70. The multiples of a number with a specific meaning adds emphasis and strength to its imagery under the Hebraic numerology. The number 7 came to symbolize the meaning of a totality or completeness associated with God's authority on the earth. So when God gets everything done that he wants to do, then that's the 70. He'll fulfill it. It's going to be done. Not a literal type number. Now we get the number 7 from the number 3, denoting the divine, the Godhead, and 4, which symbolizes the whole earth. So we have 7 times 10 to get the 70 70s. Now, the number 10 represents completeness, fullness, or power. So, in essence, the 70 weeks simply means that when God gets everything done that needs to be done, it'll be through. It'll be complete. Not a specific time period. And now there's a whole lot of other stuff that you could look at on this. But in essence, it means when God's through, and this is all going to come to an end. They need to finish the transgressions. They need to make an end to sin. Now, Jesus did that to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy place. In other words, fulfill all this stuff. And that's what happened. Now, they were to take care of all of these difficulties. The problem is that they didn't. As time went along, over these hundreds of years, they did not fulfill this. The children of Israel kept getting further and further away from God. We ended up with them not sticking with the law of Moses, started adding to the law their own things. in verse 25, it says, "So you are to know and discern that from the issue of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress." It wasn't an easy thing to go back and to rebuild Jerusalem. They had all kinds of problems. And honestly, if you think about the situation of what was fulfilled, they just barely had Jerusalem, the temple and everything rebuilt before 70 AD. There were still some things that probably needed to be done. And that's when Titus came and destroyed it. Well, now, he tells us the time period in this verse. From the issue of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. All right, we've already seen that. The end of it, until the Messiah, the Prince of Peace. There will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And it will be built again. Again, the number 7 denoting a totality or completeness associated with God's authority on earth. And again, a better rendition would not be weeks, but 7 sevens. This would be a better way to look at that. So the house of God was rebuilt. It was rebuilt and dedicated in 516 BC, about 546 years before the crucifixion of Jesus. But they were still working on it when everything come to pass in AD 70. In verse 26 it says, "Then after 62 weeks the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined." So after the 62 weeks, the Messiah is going to be cut off. And simply, that's talking about Jesus dying on the cross. These 62 periods of week, again, not literal. As stated earlier in the study, we render the original language as sevens instead of weeks. So after this time period, the temple has been rebuilt and it will again be destroyed. The Messiah being cut off again is Jesus dying on the cross, but yet establishing the kingdom. The people of the prince, now we're talking about the Romans here. The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And I would encourage you to go back and do a little study on that. The destruction of Jerusalem. I guarantee you, whenever Titus and the Roman army came in to destroy Jerusalem, they'd already been destroying all the other cities around. It was quite an undertaking that they had already destroyed. Jerusalem was kind of the last one that was destroyed, and they made a good destruction of it. We see a warning to that in Matthew chapter 24. We'll get to that maybe here in a few weeks. It talks about coming with a flood. It was just like a flood. This army just come in like a flood, destroyed everything. And again, we have the desolation of the temple and the altar. And it was, again, just like Antiochus, they roasted a pig on it because they knew that that would completely end the Jews, or what the Jewish, anyway, the Jews. Verse 27. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offerings, and on the wings of abomination will come one who makes desolate, even until the complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes it desolate. And at the end, in AD 70, there was no more sacrifice or grain offerings. It was all gone. The abomination of desolation came into being. In other words, they killed the fatted hog, if you will, and then completely tore everything down. So in essence, when we really look at this, it's not talking about something that's going to happen way down yonder, but it is noting to Daniel that, look, it's going to be rebuilt. It's going to be decreed. They rebuilt it. Still had work to do on it. They rebuilt it. But then, during the Romans, Jesus came, died on the cross, established his kingdom, and the old covenant was void. And you go to the Hebrew letter and look at all those passages that talk about that. The covenant being confirmed is undoubtedly the new covenant, or the gospel, in essence, where it talks about here in these passages. So, briefly, most agree that the 69 weeks terminated with the first coming of Christ. So, from the decree to Christ, not something in the future. The 70 weeks started at the beginning of Jesus. The 70th week started with the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry at age 30. 3.5 years later, Jesus was crucified, bringing an end to the need for sacrifices. And through the preaching of the apostles to Israel for 3 or 4 years following Pentecost, his covenant was confirmed. And the people of the prince proved to be the Roman army that destroyed Jerusalem and its temple in AD 70, just as Jesus foretold in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. So, the concern that Daniel had was about the temple and about the children of Israel. Well, it's been explained to them. It's going to be rebuilt. We got all these years, but it will come to an end. It will be fulfilled. So, to utilize these passages, to look at something way in the future, our future, doesn't work. Because all of this was fulfilled in AD 70 when Titus and the Roman army destroyed Jerusalem and all the ramifications thereof. So we'll continue in our study next Wednesday evening, if the Lord is willing. We'll see what the weather's like.